Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Today we're piecing block number 11, and this is a Sawtooth star block. I love this block because it was the very first traditional block that I ever learned how to piece. So it's really exciting to be able to share it with you today. So let's get started. So the very first thing you want to get started with is your flying geese units. And for that you're going to need one of these B fabric rectangles and then 2 A fabric squares. And you want to prep these squares by placing a ruler from corner to corner on one diagonal and marking that diagonal line with a marking pencil. Perfect. So you just need the 2 squares marked with the diagonal. We're going to grab one of these squares and place it over that rectangle, matching up 2 corners. It's going to rest just a little more than halfway down that rectangle. We're going to take it to the sewing machine and stitch right along that marked line. So here we go. Because we're stitching right on that line and it's right starting at that corner, I want to go on ahead and lift my presser foot and get started right stitching right on that marked line. And you want to stay as perfectly on that line as you can. Try not to wiggle and wobble off of it. And then whenever you stitch off, just stitch onto a scrap charger. That's really going to get you set up well for the next piece. Okay, so you should have something that looks like this. At this point, what you want to do is take, you have kind of 2 sides here. If you fold it like this, you're going to end up with something that doesn't work. You want to fold it towards the corner so that you have a diagonal coming from corner to the center of the rectangle. Give it a good finger press to crease it, and then grab your iron and give it a press. Okay, now a lot of times people, when they're trimming a flying geese block, they'll trim out everything underneath this flap of fabric. I don't like that because I find that a lot of times, whether it's, error in marking or it's an error in stitching or whatever it is, that this piece of fabric doesn't always fill that corner of the rectangle completely. So if you cut off the fabric B rectangle, you oftentimes lose some fabric and you lose some accuracy. So I leave this piece in place, but I do trim this little triangle from the A fabric. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to trim this pretty close, about 1/8 of an inch away from the stitching, because that's just extra bulk. You don't need that for anything. Fold it back over, and now you've got 2 layers of fabric, your B fabric and your A fabric, and this is going to be nice and accurate because you know that the rectangle was cut right. Whether this triangle in place is doing anything funky or not, we know that this is going to be the right shape. Okay, for the next step, we're going to take our second square and place it in the other corner of the rectangle. And again, you want to make sure that you're going from corner to kind of the center of the block, a little past center. And yes, this is going to overlap your other piece, the piece that you've just stitched on. So take this to the sewing machine and stitch it the exact same way from corner to this point. Okay, again, I'm going to press this over. Just finger press it over. Give it a hit with your iron. And then we'll trim up that side. Now, you might not be able to see this in this shot because I'm working with these dark fabrics, but I want to show you just how off I am. Let me trim this away and you'll be able to see it even better. I am pretty off with this block. It's not the end of the world. If you want to know why, see my stitching line and see where my marked line is. I'm pretty far off, and I'm off to the wrong side. I'm off to this side over here, which means I ate up more fabric than I should have. So this is going to fold over. It's not going to fill the rectangle corner completely. So it's not going to be as accurate. I'm not going to rip it, but I am going to go into this accepting it's not going to be perfect. Okay, so fold that over. You see how much B fabric is exposed around that triangle. If I cut the B fabric, I would be piecing to the A fabric, the blue fabric, and this would be a totally inaccurate piece. But because I've left this rectangle behind it intact and in place, I'm going to piece and use this as my edges whenever I'm aligning this Flying Geese unit to anything. I'm going to always line things up along the edge of the black fabric, that B fabric, and that way this is still going to be a piece I can accurately piece with. So I hope that makes sense. As long as you leave that in place, no matter what happens with your triangles, this is still going to work. Okay, so what do you do from here? Well, now you want to repeat these steps and make a whole mess of these. You're going to need a total of 12 flying geese because we are going to be making 3 of these blocks, and they each require 4 units. So 4 units per block, and we're making 3 blocks, so make 12 of these. And here's how you lay everything out. We're going to first start with the center square. I kind of hit that pretty hard. Whenever that happens and you kind of pull stray threads off of a square, a piece of fabric you've cut, be really careful about that. I was just really rough with that as I pulled it over, and you know, honestly, this is not as accurate as I'd like now because I pulled all that off. I've lost about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch across this side, so this square is no longer really measuring the way I wanted it to. So that was kind of a, you know, my accident, but hopefully it's going to be a lesson that's helpful for you. But basically you want to take this center square and line up 2 Flying Geese units to both sides. Take these to your sewing machine and stitch that seam with a really accurate 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to have something like this. You want to press these seams open carefully, and you might want to even come in here and clip. You're going to have a pretty bulky area where that Flying Geese, all those points come together. So you might want to clip and trim a bit just to reduce that bulk. Okay, then you're going to take a Flying Geese unit to the top and one to the bottom, and you want to make sure that these are properly aligned so you don't have them like this. You'll end up with a very different looking block. Trust me, I've done that, and it's one of those things you get it completely finished, everything's done, and then oh, I put one block in upside down. Then you're going to take these B squares and put them in the corners, and again what you're going to do is just simply layer these, piece them, get everything together. Let me show you what the block looks like mostly together. This unit, whenever you get all of these pieces put together with it, let's see, I can replace this with this and you can really see it. When all of this comes together, you should have a 6.5 inch block here. So now that we've learned how to piece a Flying Geese unit, you're going to want to go ahead and piece all of them for all of your blocks. And we're making 3 of these blocks, and each requires 4 of these Flying Geese units. So you're going to need to make a total of 12. Go on ahead and piece all of those just like this, step by step, and then you can start constructing your blocks. And this is how this comes together. You're going to start with a center square and 2 Flying Geese to either side. Layer these, basically just right sides together, and stitch that seam with a very accurate 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to end up with something that looks like this, and you might want to take a minute to flip it on the back and trim out some seam allowance. You're going to have some bulk right where all of those fabrics kind of layer on top of each other for the Flying Geese. You do want to very carefully press these seam allowances open, both with finger press first and then hit it with your iron. And then you're going to do pretty much the same thing with a Flying Geese unit to the top and bottom, and then these little squares, and they should be B fabric squares to both sides. And so that's how that's going to come together. Just simply take the B fabric on top of the Flying Geese, stitch that seam, press it open, and then you will have things put together. And so here's our last seam. I'm actually going to demonstrate this one for you because this can be a little challenging to line up. Basically what you want to do is you want to have your strip, flying geese with 2 squares, and then you've got your center strip. What needs to match really well is the seam between the A fabric and B fabric and this seam here around that center square. So let's match this up and take it to the sewing machine. I'll give you some tips on making sure this lines up very nicely. Okay, this works exactly like aligning any seam, but I really want to be careful. One thing I've done is I've trimmed out some B fabric in the seam allowance, just simply so it's a little less bulky. I'm pinching with my index finger and thumb to make sure I've got a really nice hold on these pieces. I'm pulling back to make sure that the seam is in proper alignment, and then kind of sliding it forward again and making sure the edges are in alignment. And then I place a pin right there in the seam allowance. Do the same thing for the second one. Kind of pull that down, fold it over, make sure everything's in alignment, pinch it to hold it tight, and then place a pin. And we've got a lot of layers here, at least 3 layers coming into this corner, so this is a really good place to have your needle in the down position, lift your presser foot, and slide the whole thing underneath your presser foot, and then start stitching. Oh, I hit that pen. That is one of those things I've been very guilty for this year. I've been hitting a lot of pens. But, you know, so far it hasn't damaged my machine, and I can do it very, very slowly and carefully. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay, so that seam is stitched, and I'm going to just simply finger press this open. And then flip it over. You can also press with your iron just to get that really nicely opened. You will have bulk in a seam allowance. You're going to have a lot of different, mostly 2 layers coming together. Where we had those flying geese, definitely take a little time to trim carefully and clip out as much as you can, because this will be a little challenging to stitch with all those layers in place. Okay, so at this point I want to point out something that I've been noticing with my flying geese today. For some reason, I'm having the situation where the point for the triangle is kind of coming up. It's about 1/8 of an inch from the center square. Now, if you want to freak out about this, you can, and you can rip this out and try and stitch it again and kind of hit it more dead on. Like this is more of what you're kind of looking for with the flying geese. The point is coming right to the edge of the piece it's being pieced with. Personally, I am not going to obsess about this. I think it looks perfectly fine. What would bother me more is if I saw a blunted tip to this triangle. So too much of it was taken up in that seam allowance. Having the triangles nicely formed, I think that looks perfectly fine. I'm not bothered by this a single bit. So I'm going to leave it and understand that, you know, that's something that you kind of have to always make a decision with. If you see something in a block that's not quite perfect, you know, how does it really matter? You know, what is it that would bug you about it? For me, a blunted point, that would bother me a lot. This kind of thing doesn't bother me a bit. So just understand there's always a choice. You don't have to rip. Okay, to expand your block, you're simply going to use border fabrics. We have a little strip of B fabric. Those go to the top and bottom, and longer strips of B fabrics to both sides. They're just longer strips, piece in the sides. Press the seams open and you'll be done. Now if these strips come out a little long for your block, just simply lay your ruler over it and trim it up to 10 inches, or you can just leave it. Remember, we're quilting within this square 8 inches, and we will trim this up to 8 inches whenever we go to finish the blocks. So it really isn't a big deal no matter which way you end up. So at this point, to finish the block, we're simply going to surround it with border strips. We've got 2 strips of B fabric that go to the top and bottom. Simply layer the strip over the edge of the block, stitch this with an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it open, And then, of course, grab your 2 strips for both sides. And these are a bit longer, so that way they fill in the sides of the block completely. And this is going to allow you to have more than enough space to hang on the edges of the block so we can quilt it beautifully. So that's it for our Sawtooth Star block. I really hope that you will enjoy making 3 of these blocks this month. We need to piece 3 of them so we can learn 3 awesome free motion quilting methods. And the nice thing is, by the time you piece 12 flying geese units, I think you're going to be pretty darn good at it. Even if something doesn't come out perfect, I showed you mine weren't coming out perfect today. It's still going to look beautiful, and we're still going to quilt it and make an awesome block. They're going to be a great addition to our building blocks quilt. So my name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Pick up your copy of the Building Blocks quilt pattern and learn how to piece this Sawtooth Star block as well as 11 other blocks to make the beautiful Building Blocks quilt. Find the pattern at leahday.com and join us as we learn piecing and free motion quilting together. Until next time, let's go quilt.